Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's live presentation. We're going to get started, well, I guess just about now. So buckle up and let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation on relapse vulnerabilities. Specifically, we're talking about H.A.L.T. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. Today, we're going to explore the mnemonic H.A.L.T. to recognize the full breadth of what it represents, discuss how H.A.L.T. can lead to relapses in all pieces of your life, and explore cognitive behavioral strategies of good orderly direction to prevent and cope with H.A.L.T. So if you've worked with people in addictions, you're probably familiar with H.A.L.T. But if you haven't, let's go over it. H.A.L.T. stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And these are four potential relapse triggers, four vulnerabilities that can make people more susceptible to relapse in each area of their life. So I want you to think about what these things mean to you. When you think of hungry, I know my first thought is food, right? Does it mean something else to you? Same thing with when you think about being angry. And guess what? Anger comes in a bunch of different flavors: guilt, resentment, irritation. Lonely, well, that one's pretty self-explanatory. And tired. And tired, again, is not just necessarily physical exhaustion. So let's take a little bit more of a deeper look into what we're talking about here. When people experience H.A.L.T, when they experience being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, they're more vulnerable to relapse because it triggers the stress cascade. Think about when you've got these things going on, and a lot of times we have multiple going on. If we're hungry, then we also may be angry, so we're hangry. But physically, when these things are happening, H.A.L.T represents a stressor or a group of stressors. And when we're exposed to stressors, it triggers that stress response. It releases glutamate. It triggers that fight or flight response. If it's maintained, if you're persistently feeling angry or lonely or tired or even hungry, then we start to see changes in the body. Just like we see to cognitive stress, we start to see increased systemic inflammation, sleep difficulties, poor nutritional absorption, changes in the gut microbiome. So that sets off another cascade. When your body starts not functioning well, it can cause problems in your interpersonal relationships. You may not have as much patience or tolerance for other people or even your own mistakes. It can cause emotional changes when you're not getting enough sleep, when your neurotransmitters are altered because that gut microbiome is altered and you've got the stress response kind of going on in the background. You're going to feel more distress. Cognitively, it's harder to control intrusive thoughts. You're more likely to notice the negative. It's harder to focus. We get brain fog when we're tired. So as a result of those physiological changes that happen when we are stressed, starts impacting even more things. Environmentally, your sense of feeling safe and not being triggered, quote, all the time. I know that's a distortion, but as I mentioned, you tend to notice the threats. You tend to notice the negative more when you are in that stress state, when you're in that threat state. So you're probably going to notice more triggers in the environment for distress. Likewise, if you are in recovery from addiction, you may notice more triggers in the environment for your addiction because your brain's going, I'm noticing all this stress and I really want to make it stop. Spiritually, we may start feeling more and more disconnected from ourselves as well as others. I asked you earlier what hunger means to you. And I said, for a lot of us, we think food. People need to eat a good diet in order to help their body make the neurotransmitters and function well and recover and all that stuff. That's true. But hunger at its core is a word that means desire, and we hunger for a lot of things in life. Encourage people, and I encourage you right now to think about what things that you hunger for that are beneficial. And thinking about food, water, and pain relief. Of course, those are beneficial. We don't want to be in pain. Pain is our body's signal that something's wrong. We can't necessarily make the pain go away all the time. Pain is inevitable. But we can want to relieve that pain because pain represents a stress, and we don't want to keep that stress response going. It makes sense to hunger for these things. Interpersonally, we can express or we can hunger for love and connection with ourselves as well as others. We may hunger for being in a relationship because we don't have a relationship with ourselves, and we don't even realize that yet. Emotionally, we hunger for happiness. That's a pretty straightforward one. Cognitively, we may hunger for knowledge of how to handle life on life's terms, of how to deal with people, of the facts in a situation so we can make better choices, and awareness of what's going on. Environmentally, we can hunger for safety and comfort. We want to feel not stressed, not threatened in our environment. We want to be able to be at work, be in the car, be at home, and feel safe, feel comfortable. Now, there are degrees of comfort. You can have the absolute lap of luxury. Is that really necessary? We hunger for comfort, and it's important to recognize that. And then spiritually, we hunger for a connection with ourselves, with our values, with others who share our values and our beliefs. It doesn't mean we can't connect with people who have different values and beliefs, but it's human nature to want to have a group of people, to connect with people who are somewhat similar to you, who get you, so to speak. Thinking about those things you hunger for, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you hunger for, but we've only got an hour today. Do you go about satisfying those hungers in a healthy way? For example, pain, love, and happiness. We'll take a look at those three. Pain. When I'm in pain, when people are in pain, they want to make it stop. Do you ice, rest, see the doctor, not elevate it if necessary? Do you take anti-inflammatories if necessary? Do you do what is prudent, what is wise to address the pain? Or do you say, oh, this isn't going to work, I need to numb that up? And that could be physical or emotional pain, but we want the pain to stop. And the imprudent way would be seeking immediate relief through chemicals, so to speak, especially our addictions, or just pushing through. I remember when I was in college, I used to run a lot, and I used to get bursitis, swollen knees, a lot. And instead of being prudent and going, well, this may be my body telling me I need to quit and not run the extra 3 miles, I would push through, telling myself eventually it would stop hurting. And yeah, it did, but at what cost to my knees? So using prudence is really important when it comes to pain. Sometimes we have to accept the things we cannot change. And that's where that serenity comes in. If you've got a low back problem, if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, if you've got some other pain that you can't make completely go away forever, developing a level of acceptance and serenity, recognizing what you can change. For example, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune issue. So recognizing that stress management is going to be important to prevent flare-ups. And this all comes down to prudence, using your knowledge, your wisdom, and deciding how to use your energy and how to best respond in order to move toward your rich and meaningful life. What things do you need to use your energy to change? What things do you need to use your energy to accept? Endurance is a combination of strength and courage. When we endure distress, when we endure pain, yeah, it ain't fun, but sometimes we can't make it go away. And sometimes we don't want to. When we have emotional pain, when we're grieving, sometimes we need to sit with that feeling and work through it, endure the distress for the moment. It doesn't mean nurture it, hold on to it, and never let it go. But endurance means recognizing your personal strengths and having the courage to tolerate the distress. Respect for self and others. And we're still on pain here, but I'm helping you see how these principles of what we call good orderly direction can be applied. When we're talking about pain, if we're in physical pain, respecting ourselves and saying, you know what, maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to call it right now. And I'll go out and work in the garden, and I'll be out there for a couple of hours, and I won't be paying attention to myself. I will not be being mindful, which is not prudent. I'll give you that. And my husband will come out sometimes and go, okay, Dawn-Elise, time to come in. Now, my first reaction is, you can't tell me what to do. My second reaction is, he wants what's best for me. And he knows that if I keep pushing it, I'm going to be in agony tonight. So showing respect to him when I am out there and in order to prevent pain. And when you're in pain, respecting your limitations. Sometimes you just can't do it that day, and that's okay. Earnestness, forgiving of self and other. When you're in pain, you may feel guilty because you can't do those things, because you're showing respect to yourself and you're taking some time off. You may feel guilty about that. And it's important to recognize that guilt is a form of anger. It's anger at yourself. Being willing to forgive yourself for not being 100% of the time. Being realistic, and we'll get to compassionate in a minute. That's really important, because if you start getting angry with yourself that you can't do the things that you want to do, then it's going to trigger that stress response, and we'll get to anger in a minute, and lead to increased risk of relapse of inflammatory conditions, reduced immunity, poor sleep, addictions, mood disorders, the whole ball of wax. So we really want to recognize how these things work together. And forgiving others when you're in pain. Maybe other people don't recognize when you're in pain. Other people may not understand the quality of your pain. They may not understand how bad it hurts. They may tell you to suck it up and get over it, or minimize what you're experiencing, because we all experience pain differently. And being willing to forgive others for their lack of empathy or their inability to understand how it impacts you can be a huge step. You can express to them how bad it feels. If they are unwilling to hear, do you want to hold on to that anger and resentment at them for not understanding? Is that prudent? Is that a good way to use your energy to move towards your rich and meaningful life? Or is that going to increase the stress and inflammation responses and increase your likelihood of relapse? Only you can answer that. Earnestness means giving 100% to make sure you keep your word. And if you're in recovery, you are probably following a program or a plan. And this can be recovery from a heart attack. It can be recovery from addiction or depression. Recovery is really general. But usually when we experience something that we have to recover from, there's a recovery plan. We have to change our behavior some. And earnestness means giving 100%. I said I was going to follow this, and I'm going to do these things so I can get better and move toward my rich and meaningful life. Focusing on what do I need to do to remind myself to be prudent, enduring, respectful, and forgiving. That can be really difficult. So taking steps to improve your ability to earnestly follow through is important. And it can be really helpful to have a friend or a loved one or a sponsor who is there kind of coaching you along, going, I see you're getting a little bit tired here. You got this. How can I help you go the last mile? How can I help you keep going on this path? Compassion for self and other. When you're in pain, you can, you're hungering for that pain to go away. That's where we started at. And you can be angry about the fact that you can't make it go away. Gosh darn it, this hurts, and I've got other stuff that I want to do, but I can't make the pain go away. Acknowledging that, oh my gosh, I'm powerless over this pain right now. And most of us really have issues with admitting powerlessness. And having compassion for yourself, though. I'm hungering for pain relief. I really want to make this stop any way I can. I'm having compassion for myself that, I can see where some of these unhealthy cravings might be coming from. I'm being earnest in my recovery and saying, but I'm not going to do those things. I'm going to do these things over here. And I'm going to not judge myself for having those occasional thoughts. They happen. And then being truthful with self and other is also important. When you're hungry for something, when you start having these cravings for something, thinking about what is it that I'm actually craving? Am I craving the substance? Am I craving pain relief? And what is it that I really want right now? Think about things you do, things you hunger for that are not beneficial. Physically, sticking with that pain for right now. Opioids or alcohol. That's not a healthy way in most cases to relieve pain, especially not long term. But it may be something that you think about because guess what? None of us wants to be in pain. That is, thinking about those things may represent an unhealthy way of trying to solve a healthy hunger. We want to be pain-free. We want the pain to be reduced at the very least. Interpersonally, things that you hunger for that may not be beneficial include relationships with anybody. And when we get to that point where we're so desperate for external validation, we're so desperate for a connection with somebody, we may start choosing people that we know are going to, as we say in addiction recovery, co-sign on our bullshit. And it is important that we recognize whether we're hungering for a healthy relationship or we're hungering for somebody with a pulse. One's potentially not going to be healthy and the other one potentially is. And where is that coming from? That hunger for interpersonally may be coming from a desire for love because you don't feel connected to yourself. You don't love yourself. You want to feel loved and accepted. That's a healthy hunger, but maybe solving it in an unhealthy way. Emotionally, we hunger for happiness. And sometimes that happiness may be the rush that we felt with addiction. And addictions, remember, can be to relationships, to substances, to behaviors. Some people get addicted to that high, that emotional feeling, and hungering for that rush can be detrimental to long-term recovery. What are you trying to fill here? Many people, because in their mood disorder, in their trauma, in their addiction, whatever, their stress response became dysregulated. What makes most people feel happy or even maybe elated doesn't really do much for them. So it takes a whole lot more to trigger feelings in people whose stress response has become dysregulated. Instead of needing a teaspoon of neurotransmitter, you need a gallon. And in order to trigger the release of that gallon, it takes a whole lot more stimulation. The brain will eventually rewire itself. So your tolerance is a lot lower. So things that used to make you happy start making you happy again. It's like, wow, I'm feeling something. And that's wonderful. But recognizing when we're taking things to extremes because our nervous system is not cooperating is important, because when we do that, we are contributing or maintaining the dysfunction in that nervous system. I did that video on the dopamine detox, and that's kind of a generic term. But basically, in recovery, we need to make sure that we avoid unnecessary stress and we take good care of ourselves to let our nervous system heal. And that takes time. Cognitively, we may hunger for answers where there are no answers. We may hunger for people who think exactly the way we do. Again, we want them to co-sign on our crap. And that may not be the healthiest sort of situation. Sometimes it's good to hear differing opinions. Sometimes it's good to get input from other people. Environmentally, when we hunger for safety, we may hunger for what we think is going to make us feel safe. If I had a mansion in Beverly Hills and I had a Bentley and I had all this money, I would feel safe. Would you though? Don't know. And then spiritually, again, we hunger for that connection with people who share similar values. We hunger to feel like people get us, to feel like we're connected and that we matter. Some people will go about this by becoming human chameleons. Instead of living authentically, instead of being truthful with themselves and others about what they want and need, they will be whatever you want them to be in order to try to feel a connection to you, in order to try to avoid rejection. Now, the next one is angry and anxious. And typically, when we talk about HALT and addiction recovery, we only say angry. But in my mind, you cannot separate anger and anxiety. Why is that? Because anger is a response to a threat. There's a threat out there. Your brain says, ooh, you're vulnerable to a threat. You're vulnerable to what that threat is. And people tend to react to that threat with either anger, the fight response, or anxiety, the flight response. Either one is the stress response. And when you're in that stress frame of mind, when you're in that fight or flight mode, you're not thinking, you're not using your higher order cognitive processes, you're not examining the facts in context at this time. You are trying to do whatever you need to do to survive. Well, that's good, but at a certain point, we need to figure out, okay, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling anxious, kind of like when the smoke alarm goes off. It gives you energy to check out the situation, to figure out whether there is a threat. Just because I feel anxious or angry doesn't mean there is a threat. It means there might be. Based on past experiences, my brain says, hey, there might be something going on here. Okay, let me get up and take a look. Like all emotions, anger and anxiety are designed to help you stay safe based on the facts in this context at this time, or FitCat. What was threatening, what was traumatic, what was dangerous last week, 20 years ago, may not be so right now, which is why when we feel that feeling, we need to recognize it, acknowledge it, tolerate the distress, using our distress tolerance skills, get into our wise mind and figure out, is there a threat? If so, what is the best course of action? Anger itself isn't bad. It's a survival mechanism. It's what you do with it that causes distress. If you hold on to it, it causes distress. People who get angry a lot, what that's saying is they feel unsafe. They feel threatened a lot. What are they hungering for? Safety. What are they feeling? Unsafe. And their body is producing an emotional reaction. Thinking about for yourself or for others, how does holding on to anger impact you physically? Well, when you're angry, it's a stress response. Going to impact gut microbiome, nutrition, absorption, sleep, pain, inflammation, immunity. It revs up that stress response. So if you're trying to avoid unnecessary stress and avoid revving that up unnecessarily, you got to figure out what anger is beneficial. And for a lot of people that are in recovery from anything, there's often a fair amount of anger. There's often a fair amount of feeling unsafe. And recognizing what triggers those feelings is really important. Interpersonally, when you hold on to anger or anxiety, well, how does that affect your energy that you can use on your relationships? How does that impact how you interact with other people? Are you welcoming and joyous and fun to be around, or are you irritable and do you push people away, or do you just wear them out because you're so anxious about a lot of stuff most of the time? Thinking about how that impacts you. How could you, if you let go of or dealt with some of those anger and anxiety triggers so you felt safer, how might it positively impact your relationships? Emotionally, when you're angry, it's hard to feel happy. It's hard to feel anger and happiness at the same time. Acknowledging that. But anger does like to bring on his buddies. Anger does like to bring on feelings of hopelessness and helplessness that anything's going to change. I feel powerless. I feel angry. I feel powerless over my anger. It brings on anxiety about rejection because of your powerlessness. Yeah. It can bring on feelings of guilt because you recognize your anger may be excessive or out of place, but you're feeling it anyway. So you start feeling guilty, which is anger at yourself. Cognitively, when we feel bad, when our body factory's not working, when we don't feel like we've got good support in our relationships, when emotionally we don't feel happy, cognitively, we are probably going to notice the negatives. We are going to have more difficulty controlling unwanted thoughts. We're going to have brain fog. When we are in fight or flight, part of that is brain fog. Some people talk about tunnel vision when they're in fight or flight. They're focused on that one thing they're trying to fight or flee from. They're not able to focus on the other stuff. Environmentally, holding on to anger can create tension in different environments, and it can make you, again, notice, because anger is a response to a threat. It makes you more aware of the threats, the micro expressions, the this, the that. And typically, our brain interprets those things based on our emotional state. If we're angry at that point in time, we're feeling unsafe, we often perceive a lot of stimuli in our environment as threatening, even if they're not necessarily threatening, because our brain is looking at everything through those unsafe glasses. Think about what things trigger your anger or anxiety. Pain. I know when I'm in pain, I'm a big old cranky pants. Rejection. When other people reject you, it can make you fear further rejection. It can make you fear isolation. It can make you fear or be angry. Because guess what? If somebody's rejecting you, they're using their power to leave or to reject you, and you have no power to control them. And for a lot of people, that's terrifying. Depression, low motivation. These things can also trigger anger and anxiety. A lot of people in recovery, especially early recovery, the first few months after open heart surgery, after of recovering from a mood issue, of recovering from an addiction, a lot of people, because their stress response, because their nervous system is kind of haywire because of all the stress they've been going through, they may feel exhausted and hopeless and helpless. It just may seem overwhelming to change things. They may have low energy and low motivation to do things that they're supposed to do, like go to group or do their journaling or go to the gym, which can trigger anger at themselves. It's like, well, I know I'm supposed to be doing this. Why don't I have energy? Why can't I feel happy right now? Why can't I be pain-free? Why can't everybody just love me? Well, that ain't the way the world works. Encouraging people to become more aware of their anger and anxiety triggers in their physical environment, in their physical health. If I'm hungry or I'm hot, especially, both of those are irritability triggers for me. Now, it's not full-blown rage, but I tend to be a lot more irritable. When I'm in pain, when I'm sick, when I'm on medications because I'm sick, if I've had too much caffeine, it tends to make me more irritable, more likely to have my anger or anxiety triggered. Interpersonally, every person has their own different experiences that can trigger the threat response in relationships. And it's important for people to become aware of what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And again, whether it is accurate in this context at this time based on the current facts. Are they reacting to what this person is doing and the current situation, or are they assuming what this person is thinking or doing based on prior similar experiences? And interpersonal triggers often revolve around rejection, abandonment, and pain, and helping people identify how those things, what do people do that rubs you just the wrong way or irritates you or ticks you off. And I think a lot of us have a laundry list we can come up with. But again, we need to recognize, where did we get the idea that was threatening, that was, a potential threat to us? And in this context, with this person at this time, is it? Emotionally, what things trigger your anger and anxiety? Well, some people get anxious that they're never going to feel happy again, or they're angry because they're depressed. Cognitively, I know for me, when I've got brain fog, it is frustrating as all get out. And I get so irritable with myself, which is not productive because that just creates more brain fog when I can't focus. So recognizing what cognitive things that trigger my anger or anxiety. Cognitive distortions go in here too. Mind reading. If I assume I know what other people want, need, or are going to do or are thinking, that creates a lot of potential anger and anxiety in me. What do I do with it? Environmentally, what things in the environment trigger your anger or your anxiety? I see, a stray animal. I get angry that somebody dumped an animal. I see, there are things that I see in my environment that can trigger my irritability. Getting cut off in traffic may trigger my anger response. Okay. Again, feelings are natural. That's your brain saying, based on past experiences, this might be a threat, and evaluating what to do with that, not just holding on to that anger or anxiety, which will eventually cause you to start craving some relief. Do you go about addressing your anger and anxiety in a healthy way? If you are angry about rejection, are you prudent in how you deal with it? For example, do you recognize that you can't change another person and accept that they rejected you? Okay. Do you use your wisdom to separate the person from the behavior? They didn't reject you. They reject your thought or your belief or your project. They didn't say you were bad. They said, no, you need to do that over again, or I disagree. Is that rejection of you? Using your wisdom and your serenity to identify what aspects of that rejection you can change and what aspects you have to accept. Endurance. Anger represents a threat. Anxiety represents a threat. Sometimes there is a potential threat. You're going to the doctor, you got to get shots. You get angry or anxious about it because, it sucks, but you got to go do it, and enduring it using your knowledge that, hey, this isn't going to last for long, enduring that distress until it's over with instead of avoiding it. If you avoid getting your tetanus booster, what are the potential consequences? And is that the best way to address your anxiety about shots? Just to avoid them? And the answer is no. Respect of self and other. When somebody rejects you or rejects your idea, it's important to respect their boundaries, respect their beliefs. If they have different beliefs than you do, okie dokie. You don't have to agree with them, but it's not your place or your right to tell them how to think or feel. And likewise, it's not their place to tell you how to think or feel. Respecting, and it's so hard a lot of times in recovery to respect people's cognitive and emotional boundaries. When they're feeling sad or they're grieving, we want to fix it. We don't like seeing them sad. That's not our right. When we see them angry, we want to help them feel better. That's not our right. We need to respect their boundaries and their right to feel how they feel. And they need to respect our ability and our right to feel how we feel. And we need to respect ourselves and our recovery and what we see as our rich and meaningful life when we decide what is the most respectful way I can address this anger in this context. Forgiveness of self and other is important. Anger often comes from a place of feeling threatened or abandoned or let down by somebody. When somebody rejects us, Does staying angry at them for rejecting us do any good? I've worked with people who've gone through some nasty divorces, and months, even years later, they are still angry at their significant other or ex-significant other, and they're still carrying around this rage in their belly. Is that a good use of their energy? How does that impact their other relationships? What would happen if you forgave them? And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean saying, it's okay, no problem. It means saying, what's done is done. It can't be changed, and it is not worth, or you are not worth, my energy to keep throwing it back to that issue. I am going to use my energy to focus it on things that are important and are going to help me move toward my rich and meaningful life, which is apparently not you. If we're divorced, you've rejected me, whatever. Earnestness, keeping your word. If somebody rejects an idea that you have, and this is more with rejecting ideas, maybe they think that their way for recovery is the only way for recovery. All right, well, that is their right to think that. That is their boundary. And working earnestly to maintain your own recovery, it's important to, number one, respect theirs, but also respect your own. Be willing to hear what they have to say, take what's useful, and leave the rest. Acknowledging that you are earnestly working, you're doing your best to follow your recovery plan. Your recovery plan is your recovery plan. Compassion for self and other. When we get rejected, whether it's our idea or our person, it hurts. It sucks. And having compassion for yourself instead of trying to push it down and pretend the pain doesn't exist, well, guess what? Just like bad potato salad, that stuff eventually comes back up, and it ain't pretty. Having compassion for yourself when you're feeling angry about being rejected, when you're feeling, and recognizing what you're angry about. Are you angry only about this person's rejection of you at this time? Or are you angry about that and it reopened all those old rejection wounds that you still haven't dealt with, that rotten potato salad? Having compassion for yourself, recognizing all those things is truthfulness. Having compassion for yourself for how much it hurts when you're rejected, and saying, all right, I need to be kind to myself today, maybe even this week, or however long you need to be. Hopefully you're compassionate to yourself all the time. But when you've experienced a trauma, when you've experienced a rejection, for example, sometimes you need a little extra compassion. Loneliness is a feeling of disconnection that's often driven by a fear of rejection and abandonment. A lot of people feel lonely because they feel disconnected from others, but they're afraid to put themselves out there because they fear rejection. And it's this negative cycle. Loneliness often occurs in people who do not have a good relationship with themselves and seek external validation. People who have a low sense of self-worth, they don't love themselves, they don't know themselves, often look to others to validate them, to tell them you have the right to breathe the air. And it can feel very threatening to put yourself out there, to make new relationships, to try to connect with people if there's a chance they're going to reject you. Because a person who's thinking this way often doesn't separate behaviors or thoughts from beings, and they may interpret rejection of an idea or maybe even rejection of them. It's like, okay, we're oil and water. We don't work together. That's okay. But the person internalizes it and says, something's wrong with me, which instead of getting validation from the external, they're getting criticism or abandonment, rejection, and it just cuts them to the core. So a lot of times it's too scary to reach out. Think about how loneliness impacts you physically, interpersonally, emotionally, cognitively, environmentally, and spiritually. When we are lonely, when people are lonely, we tend to feel depressed. We tend to feel uneasy. We tend to feel isolated. And as humans, we're designed to be part of a group. We're designed to not have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. So it can be exhausting. When we're lonely, it can make it more difficult to tend to our own self-care. What things trigger your loneliness, sense of disconnection or isolation? For example, in addiction recovery, maybe somebody is recovering from alcohol addiction, they can't drink. So they feel disconnected and isolated because the people that they used to hang out with drink or use, and they can't do that anymore. So they can't go out with their friends to do the things they used to do. A lot of times in recovery, relationships have to change. It doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship has to go, but what you used to do together may need to change. Physical limitations is another one that makes people feel lonely. If they've got POTS or rheumatoid arthritis or something else that makes it so they can't do things they used to do, then they may start feeling lonely. They may start feeling like nobody understands. They can't do the things that, quote, everybody else is doing. So they feel isolated. Interpersonally, social media can cause people to feel lonely because you see other people appearing to have the most wonderful life in the world and having the greatest friends and all this fun. And you're sitting there going, well, who do I get to have fun with? I feel lonely. I want to go have fun, but I don't have anybody to have fun with. People who disagree with me can, and when people disagree with your thoughts, it can cause you to feel lonely. If you feel threatened by their disagreement, if the only way that you feel connected to somebody is if they agree with you 100% of the time, you're probably going to feel kind of isolated. And a lack of self-awareness can cause people to feel lonely. If I don't even know what I like, then how do I know who to connect to and what's going to help me feel happy? What things I'm going to enjoy doing with others? Emotionally, when people are depressed or anxious, they often also feel isolated and lonely, like nobody gets it. They don't understand. They're not there to help them or support them. Cognitively, especially mind reading, there's a lot of cognitive distortions that can set barriers between us and other people. But mind reading is a big one. When we assume that we know that other people aren't thinking the same way we do or don't have the same beliefs that we do, we can feel isolated and lonely. Environmentally, seeing happy people at the mall or at the grocery store can remind you that you don't have somebody else that is significant in your life, and it can trigger loneliness. And just simply being alone, it's Saturday night and you got no plans, can trigger loneliness for some people. Other people are like, oh, that sounds great. But for some people, that triggers loneliness. And having differing values. And there's a lot of conflict in the world right now. And there's a lot of people with a lot of different values. And it can feel unsafe to share our values with others, which can contribute to loneliness because you don't know, is there anybody out there who thinks like I do or not? Do you go about addressing your loneliness in a healthy way? When you're feeling lonely, do you use your knowledge of what's important in your life, of the people that actually are there? A lot of people feel lonely when they actually do have a fair number of supports. They just haven't reached out. And so are you accepting the things you cannot change. You may not have 500 friends. And using your energy to change the things you can, whether that means starting to go to a group, a support group, or pick up a new hobby so you can be around people that share similar interests, or whether that means you start connecting with the people that are already in your life that you've kind of disconnected from. Enduring, having strength and courage to put yourself out there it's hard. Well, that's an understatement. It's hard to meet new people and to be vulnerable. But in recognizing that you can endure that is an important step in recovery. Recognizing the benefits to not feeling lonely versus the benefits, if you will, to staying isolated, but avoiding any type of potential rejection. Forgiveness of self and other is really important. When we're lonely, a lot of times, remember I said people who are lonely often fear rejection and they fear criticism. And that often comes from their own perceived prior failures or rejection and criticism from the past. And they just said, you know what? Not worth it to interact with other humans. I'll spend my time with my dog. Thank you. But forgiving yourself for not loving yourself, forgiving yourself for relationships that you may have pushed away as a result of your illness is important. Otherwise, you're going to be carrying around that baggage, which is going to prevent you from fully connecting with others. Earnestly doing what you can to address your loneliness in a way that's meaningful for you. Having compassion for yourself and others. When you're having one of those lonely moments, instead of getting angry with yourself that you're feeling lonely or angry about the situation, having compassion with yourself and go, okay, I feel lonely. What is the best way to use my energy right now to address this? Do I call a friend? Do I go to a movie? Do I just get dressed and go to the gym so I'm at least around other people? Do I take my dog on a walk? What is it that I can do? And being truthful with yourself about the reasons that you're lonely. What is it that keeps you from making connections with others? Even if you desire them, maybe you're not doing it because of some of those fears, because of some of those threats that you perceive. And what can you do to address those? What do you need? Being truthful with yourself about what you need in a relationship to feel connected instead of lonely. And finally, tired is exhaustion. And we can be tired in a lot of ways. Physically tired, that's pretty self-explanatory. Interpersonally tired is when you're just over it with people. You're just, I can't take another person right now. I can't take any more input. I'm just over it. Emotionally tired, when you can't, it hurts. You've been hurting. You just can't feel anything anymore. And you can hunger for that pain to go away, recognizing that emotional exhaustion may be your brain's way, your body's way of saying, okay, you know what? You need to show some compassion for yourself and do something to address this. If you are emotionally exhausted from something, what do you do to recover, to recharge? Cognitively, we can be tired from thinking too much from a really hard day or from struggling with problems that we can't seem to find the answer to. A prudent response to that would be to either take some frequent breaks so we don't get cognitively exhausted, and or seek assistance, seek consultation instead of trying to do it all your own. Spiritually, we can feel tired because we are just not feeling connected. We don't feel like there's anything we do makes a difference. And looking at that prudently, those are cognitive distortions. Nothing I do ever makes a difference. That's all or nothing thinking. So it's important to recognize what we can do to feel less tired. Thinking about, for you, what triggers exhaustion in each of those areas we've talked about. What triggers your physical exhaustion? For me, obviously not getting enough sleep is one. If I have a really hard interval workout, that's another one. My body is going to be going, oh, I feel like jelly. There are a lot of things that can contribute to that. Interpersonally, what things contribute to that exhaustion? And for introverts, for example, being around a lot of people can be just exhausting. It's just overstimulating. For extroverts, on the other hand, not being around people can actually be exhausting. Emotionally, what triggers emotional exhaustion in you? Mentally, what triggers mental exhaustion? How does exhaustion impact each of the pieces of your life? When you're exhausted mentally, how does that impact your sleep, your inflammation, your stress levels? How does it impact your pain? For a lot of us, when we become exhausted, that's a stress response, and it can trigger a cascade. Interpersonally, when we're exhausted, we don't have energy, or we don't have as much energy to spend nurturing relationships with others, or maybe even being mindful of our own self. Emotionally, when we're exhausted, well, think about it. When you are just plumb exhausted, how does that impact your ability to feel elated, to feel happy, to get excited about something? If I'm just exhausted and I've got this birthday party to go to that normally I'd be really jazzed about, but I'm exhausted right now. And my body's going, I ain't got any energy to give you to be happy right now. I just want to sit on the couch. Cognitively, when we're exhausted, we don't think clearly. Our brain is not clearing out adenosine like it needs to. Our body is in the stress response because of the exhaustion. And so we've got too much glutamate going around. We need to be kind to ourselves, prudently address the issue. For example, when I'm mentally exhausted, I either take a break, which is ideal, or I may start writing things down because I know I'm not going to remember squat. And then how do you go about addressing your exhaustion in healthy ways? Prudently, try to get better sleep, prioritize your sleep, prioritize your physical relaxation. It's not just sleep, but it's triggering that vagus nerve and letting your body enter that rest and digest. Enduring exhaustion a little bit, enduring the fact that, hey, I feel exhausted right now, and it makes me unhappy that I can't do this, but I'm just too exhausted to do it. And if I push it, I'm going to become more vulnerable to relapse. Respect for self and other. When we recognize that we're exhausted, when we recognize that we're tired, we need to stop making promises, stop saying yes to everybody else, and start saying yes to ourselves. Yes, I need some time to recover. Yes, I need to restore. Forgiving ourselves when we're tired for not being able to do the things that we want to do. Having compassion for ourselves and even for other people. When we're exhausted and we don't want to go to the mall with our friends or go out to dinner with our friends, they may get their feelings hurt. And they have the right to their feelings, but having compassion for ourselves and respect for ourselves for what we need to do, but also acknowledging their feelings, having compassion for them so they don't feel like they're being rejected or ignored or not cared about. Hunger, anger, anxiety, loneliness, and tiredness or exhaustion can be present in any of the pieces of your life: physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, environmental, and spiritual. When you experience HALT in one area, it makes you more vulnerable to relapse in other areas. Good orderly direction helps provide a framework to help people recognize and address their vulnerabilities and prevent relapse. I hope this was helpful. I know it was a bit of a different presentation style than usual, but hey, I figured after 1,700 and some odd videos, why not shake it up a little bit? Everybody, have an amazing day.